So if you could imagine, we're just kind of trying to think about the different stakeholders and different groupings when it comes to regenerative agriculture and managing agriculture as a soil health system. And so, first we had producers, and then we had people talking about, kind of the buyers of the product. And now we're this third panel we're calling Supply Chain Insights and Standards panel. Really, these are the intermediaries that we often also involve with that are just thinking about ways to quantify sustainability, ways to think about, how do we put numbers to things? How do we transact? And how do we make sure that a lot of this work remains to be farmer facing, because the people that do the work really need to be make sure that they're involved and appreciated for what they have done. So this third group is going to be moderated by Devon Leahy, who is the head of sustainability at Ralph Lauren. She leads the company's global sustainability strategy, including a commitment to net zero emissions by 2040 and 100% sustainably sourced key raw materials by 2025. Devon has worked in major corporations, including Walmart and Etsy, where she drove product and supply chain initiatives and consumer-facing marketing campaigns, as well as building a sustainability team with a public commitment to be powered by 100% renewable electricity and achieving zero waste operations by 2020 and running a carbon neutral marketplace. Devon, I'm so happy to have you here today moderating this panel. Please feel free to go ahead and turn on your video. And I'll just say that I've really enjoyed working with you, Devon, and I hope to continue to learn from you and figure out more about how to do regenerative agriculture, especially in cotton. So I'll turn the panel over to you now.
Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you to SHI for having me and also our wonderful panel. So our panelists are just joining on camera. So as Christine mentioned, our panel really does represent a number of stakeholders and partnerships from across the cotton value chain, from scientists working with industry and other actors to develop goals and standards for cotton, as well as consultants and nonprofits that are also working in this space. So a really interesting set of perspectives that we're going to get to hear about today. And I'll just do quick introductions for the panel. So Claire Bergkamp, who is joining us from Textile Exchange, is the Chief Operating Officer. Textile Exchange is a global nonprofit driving a positive impact on climate change across the fashion and textile industry. And TE is guiding a growing community of over 800 brands, manufacturers, and farmers to drive a collective climate strategy for the industry. And that's really grounded in holistic thinking on the interconnected impacts of climate, soil health, water, and biodiversity. So all things we've been talking about today. We also have Dr. Jesse Daystar joining us from Cotton Incorporated. He's the Chief Sustainability Officer and Vice President of Sustainability at CI and an adjunct professor at the Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke. Dr. Daystar leads the cotton industry to a more regenerative and sustainable future through supporting research and outreach programs aimed at implementing best science and practices for the soil and throughout the supply chain. Also, I'd like to introduce Dr. Deepika Mishra, who's an agronomy consultant working as a global sustainability advisor to Cotton Council International and the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. She's experienced in agriculture projects for cotton, cowpeas, castor, sesame, quail, tomato, and field pennycress across India and the United States. And Dr. Mishra works with agricultural research scientists, conservation groups, and food and trade organizations to develop sustainability and social standards and measurement systems for agricultural crops. And last but not least, Laila Petrie is the CEO of 2050, which is an expert sustainability advisory and research organization that very much focuses and looks at a lot of climate and related issues. And she has years of experience working in sustainability with a lot of focus on the apparel and textile industry. She works with the Fashion Charter, the G7 Fashion Pact, United Nations Environment Program, Textile Exchange, WWF, and a number of multinational fashion and technology companies. And she currently serves as the co-chair of the Raw Materials Working Group for the UNFCCC Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action. And with that, I'm going to ask our panelists to kind of share from their perspective. This is a common question that we heard, brought to growers as well as our corporate partners. If you think about each of your perspectives and the place that you're sitting in your organizations, those vantage points, how have you seen regenerative agriculture and soil health management change over the past few years? And I don't mean the science of it per se, although there's been a lot of development and advancement, but really the role that it's played in your respective strategies or approaches to driving impact. And what's really different, today than maybe a few years ago. Jesse, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, sure thing. First, it's a really great pleasure to be here talking with everyone and listening to the sessions before. I think it's a great event and a lot of experts here all focusing on cotton. And I think that's just a really important thing to consider is we have some of the world's leading scientists helping cotton be more sustainable, as well as the leading brands who have really leaned into supporting cotton and transforming towards a more regenerative system. So it's really exciting. And if you zoom back to kind of answer your question, Cotton Incorporated first is, we're here to improve the demand and profitability of cotton through research and promotion. And sustainability is really key and core to that today. And frankly, it generally has been since our inception over 50 years ago, but we maybe didn't call it sustainability, we called it efficiency. And just like that transformation from efficiency towards sustainability, we're also seeing that, previous to maybe the last 5 or 10 years, soil health was maybe the focus, but now we've expanded that to be a little bit more on the regenerative perspective. And if you consider where we were about 10 years ago, the U.S. cotton industry, Cotton Incorporated, as well as some other experts, helped the U.S. industry create the 10-year sustainability goals. And we did focus, significantly on the soils. We looked at could we improve soil carbon, could we reduce soil loss, and also reduce climate change impacts. We created goals around all of these, and frankly, regenerative agriculture really wasn't in the vernacular at that point, but we created individual goals that all pretty much point towards regenerative agriculture. Granted, there's some other things around that are important, but those are some key indicators that would be really useful in measuring whether we are doing regenerative or not. So it really has changed in terms of how we look at it, and to putting a word or a mindset and some definitions around it has been really useful. And one thing for the industry, it is really important that this is something that I think it's really beneficial across many indicators. There's benefits to the growers, benefits to the environment, and the social part too. And it's really important that this is something that if you improve these indicators, you have a lot of fringe benefits, which I'm sure we'll get to later in the conversation. But if you improve soil health, keep soil on the farm, you have water benefits and many others. So it's really been interesting to see how that's changed through time and how we've gotten really good push behind that. And then also the modeling and the science behind that has certainly changed. We've realized that, we understand some things pretty well. Some things we certainly need a lot more science to better understand, and what works in some places may not work in others. So there's a lot of research to be done and is being done at Cotton Incorporated and other research organizations, as well as Soil Health Institute. So I think it really has changed. I'm really happy to see the industry fall in and really push behind this one area to really make a really positive change that I think the cotton industry in the world needs.
Thanks, Jess. Deepika, do you want to build on or share some perspective from the USCTP and CCI standpoint?
Thank you, Devon, and it's my absolutely pleasure to be here at the Soil Health Institute annual event. So just to chime in what Jesse said, we have been seeing the focus on regenerative agriculture change many years ago. And that's why in 2015, when the cotton industry, they made wide efforts to organize this high priority environmental factors. And one of them was the soil health management, with a fundamental goal to help conserve the soil and also to contribute the improvement of soil health by recommending practices, as we heard from the growers this morning, for increasing soil carbon through planting cover crops, applying no-till, implementing the nutrient management, And this is not something we saw yesterday, we saw it coming. So we at the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol continue to emphasize the soil health through our promotion by signing up producers with the Trust Protocol program, which is helping create a new standard for sustainably grown cotton, where the growers, they create a farming profile, enter the list of specific production practices while quantifying their field inputs through the field print calculator, and then the data is verified by third party in order to drive the continuous improvement in the key sustainability metrics area, and like soil conservation and soil carbon.
Thank you. It's a really, great to hear from your perspectives, like how you're seeing the focus and the investment more in the science and the measurement and the metrics. Laila, curious from your vantage point, working with lots of different companies and lots of different multi-stakeholder initiatives, how you've seen this kind of change.
Yeah, thanks, Devon. I mean, I think probably I have quite a macro lens on some of these questions because I've worked in-house in companies, I've worked in NGOs with conservation agendas, and then obviously more on kind of value chain solutions. And I think actually I probably feel the biggest transformation of the panel so far of how the perspective has shifted, because I think if you look back sort of 10 years plus, conservationists were thinking very macro level. So they weren't really thinking about soil so much as ecosystems or the benefits of the ecosystems for, carbon sinks. But the soil element wasn't really front and center of any of those conversations. Companies, a huge number of companies who weren't in a leadership position would have had no idea what you meant if you said, is soil health part of your sustainability agenda? Yes, if you're in the food business or an agricultural industry, you might have had more understanding, but it wouldn't have even been something considered on a sustainability agenda sort of in previous years. And I think even farmers, a lot of the farmers that I've worked with who are maybe, not starting in the most exemplary place, they look after soil health, absolutely, because it's important. But the way that you do that was through crop rotation and then adding chemical inputs to the soil. It wasn't a sophisticated understanding of the kind of systems that you need to apply. So yeah, from my perspective, I think there's been a massive shift in terms of it being on the discussion agenda for a lot of these different groups. And I think we have seen a sort of almost savior-like role seen for regenerative agriculture in the climate space a little bit, which is a really exciting role. But I think, yeah, it's something that's now very trendy, and we need to make sure that that doesn't stay in a silo and gets integrated with all these other agendas that have been developing historically. So lots to get excited about. But yeah, I think from my perspective, at least, we were starting from a much lower space than maybe from some of the other experts on the panel.
It's a really, I think very, very much additive. I think that's definitely, I think, would be probably experienced in the kind of corporate sustainability roles. It's absolutely become so much more part of the forefront. Claire, I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Devon. Well, I think I really agree with what Laila said also. I came from a brand before joining Textile Exchange, and even a few years ago, it was, not a main topic amongst brands. And I know, Devon, from your guys' side at Ralph, we've seen a real change in leadership of companies stepping up. I think that is one of the big changes that we're seeing, is that companies are listening to what's being said by a lot of the experts out there around needing to invest in meaningful change and invest in solutions that not only help them meet their targets, but help farmers on the ground. And I think that we need to see more of that. I don't think we're nearly where we need to be, but I do think there's been a very positive change in that understanding. The panel before exemplified that as well. That there needs to be a connection from the kind of product brand side back to the farm. It can't be so disconnected as it historically been. I think it's been a very positive change. You mentioned our strategy, our Climate Plus strategy. The plus in the Climate Plus actually one of the things it stands for is soil health. It stands for soil health, biodiversity, and water. I think that approach, the more holistic approach, has been a big change. I think that when regenerative first came onto the scene, it was really seen as an opportunity to reduce carbon. I think it is. I think that focusing on it as only a carbon reduction misses the real benefit of it. And I think that knowledge is really grown a lot over the past couple of years. We released our regenerative landscape analysis at the beginning of the year. To Laila's point, I think we don't want to let this become a trendy topic. We released that to really try and get information out there. I think people really want a simple answer. Regenerative in its real form is not simple. It is place-based. It's based on indigenous wisdom. I think that recognition has also changed. And so really shifting away from the way we want to do things, which is a checklist, towards looking at outcomes and the benefits on the ground, and that holistic impact is the change that we're starting to see, which is very, very positive. I think we have to be careful not to try to oversimplify this. I think there are unifying factors. We heard that from the farmers earlier, but it is a big picture that we need to embrace in a holistic way. So yeah, I think those are some of the main things that I'm seeing, the big changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just wanted to highlight, I think all of you have touched on this, but the complexity of and how important the complexity and the nuance and the not one size fits all, not checklist. I think a lot of in some areas, I would say in the sustainability field, we've, in an effort to drive things like scale or communicate broader impact, we've been pushed, right, to simplify. And this is an area that I think we have this opportunity to ensure we're doing it almost differently, and that we're and I do think that this meeting and the stakeholders and partnerships that SHI and all of us, I think, represent is of how we're working to do that differently, which is hard but exciting and important. I did want to just pull a little bit more on this question around sort of the opportunities and challenges that the focus on the climate impacts or climate benefits of soil health management and of regenerative agriculture are starting to highlight. I think it's kind of an important, I know it's probably on the minds of a lot spoken today or that are calling in. But maybe just to start with Deepika, what do you sort of see as some of the opportunities and challenges that these carbon benefits are providing or bringing to different members of the value chains, whether that's growers and others from your perspective?
Thank you, Devon. I'm going to speak from a grower's perspective. Speaking about opportunities, we all know with the improvement of soil health, it leads to higher crop yields, better forage quality, reduced risk of resiliency to pests, droughts, or floods, directly contributing to better ecosystem and climate resilient crop. In fact, the other day I was reading about a study that was conducted in 2017 by a group focused on promoting solution to climate change. They estimated that an investment of $57 billion in regenerative agricultural practices would yield a projected return of 1.9 trillion through savings on costly inputs like synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. And if you do the maths, with every $1 investment, you're getting a $33 return as saving, which increases your farm profits. And just a little bit turning to the challenges part, and one of the major challenges of many today for a grower, I feel, is to find a way for the growers to receive the premium to cover the added cost. When the growers change practices with no incentives, to bear the cost of loss is huge. And as we heard growers Barry, Lamont, Richard this morning, for example, in a severe drought year, establishing a cover crop represents significant cost to farmers with detrimental effects and no returns. And we all know there is no pocketbook for regenerative agriculture. So we at the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol have in fact submitted a proposal to the USDA Climate Smart Agriculture Funding with our partners like Soil Health Institute, Cotton Incorporated. I'm sure Jesse will explain on it more, for our growers to receive a premium for implementing soil health management systems.
Thanks, Deepika. Jesse, do you want to tag on to that, looking at some of the challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Deepika she really did a good job explaining the cotton aspect on the farm. And I just reiterate too, what on the farm level, like what works in one region or in one year may not work the next year or in a different region. And it's back to Claire and what she said, place-based, it really is. And it is challenging. And, it'd be nice if we just said, hey, just do this, it'll work. But in reality, it's not that simple. I'm actually at my board of directors meeting here in Phoenix, Arizona, of all places, but I've had numerous conversations with growers in some parts of the country. It's like, if you don't do it, you're not making money. In other places, if you do it, you might lose money. It's totally different and unique to the situation, the field, and even year sometimes. So, it's always a challenge, and I always encourage to try it out and to explore and see how it may benefit. It may not always benefit, or maybe not all the practices will be a win, but some likely will. And it's always important to find that and maybe overcome some inertia of just doing what was done to try some new things. And I think we have a really good opportunity with some generational changes, at least in the U.S. cotton industry. I think we have some older growers who have been around and done a lot of great things, but their children are coming along. They're much more savvy with technology and precision technology to maybe really drive improvements and efficiency and sustainability. So that's really exciting to have those conversations. But now, putting on my scientist hat, and really I'm a life cycle assessment guru. I did my PhD in that and really love measuring. It's environmental accountability kind of thing, accounting rather. So I think it's really interesting that the life cycle assessment, as was mentioned earlier, does a pretty good job at measuring some things, but frankly, like soil health, not so good. And like soil loss is really not even captured in life cycle assessment. And we're working with several organizations to figure out how we can better model and quantify what's going on the field. And this is, not only at an industry level, but also we're working with scientists at USDA ARS. We're seeing how different conservation practices will change the nitrous oxide coming off the field. And fertilizers represent about 65% of the cotton's production's impact. And we're working with the different researchers in the different states to look at what are the recommendations in terms of how much fertilizer you put on the field. And does that change when you do cover crops and reduce tillage? Because we're hearing anecdotally, it really does change, as we heard in the earlier panel. So maybe we can dial some things back that, not only helps the soil, but helps the climate. So we're really focused on creating tools and metrics to help capture the benefit. And I sit on the metrics committee with Field to Market, the field print platform that the Trust Protocol uses. And we're really looking very closely at, how can we better model this and make sure the tool can capture aspects such as climate change benefits that the supply chain, value chain desperately needs to report against in terms of Scope 3 emission targets, and just to measure, quantify, and drive improvement. And I think, if we can't measure it, it's a lot harder to track the improvement, get funding and resources to really make the improvement. So that's really exciting. But back to where Deepika ended, the climate smart commodities opportunity. We did put a proposal in. We're hoping to hear that in September, hopefully is where we're getting the field. But if we do get that, we will hopefully be able to expand the opportunity to many growers around the United States to help cost share and risk share some of the aspects of creating or trying new things. Because as Deepika said, if you spend $20, $30 an acre to plant cover crops and it fails and you lose your yield, that's really hard. They're family-owned businesses. But if we can just, cover some of the costs of the seed and maybe, make it easier and less financially risky to try these things, get them over the barrier of entry. A lot of these practices will pan out, will pencil out in profitability in the long run. But those first couple of years can be very challenging as you're learning and the soil is coming together, the biome and everything is really improving because it takes some time. So I'm really hopeful about that, and really just the perspective of the industry and the government is focusing on climate smart commodities. It's been really promising. So I'm really excited about that opportunity.
Thanks, Jesse. And also I just appreciate the underscoring the importance of the science and the metrics and measurement and better understanding that piece. Claire, I may just pass it to you briefly to share a little bit about, where you see some of those challenges and opportunities, particularly maybe even around the carbon side and some of measurement.
Yeah, I mean, the measurement is key, I think, and it's complicated. I think that right now we still don't even know what we need really to measure properly. It's one of the challenges. And we know that if we try and measure soil carbon in isolation without kind of triangulating with other data points, we may, again, kind of miss the point of all this incredible work that's happening on the farm. So I do think that there's still a lot of challenges around that, and we have work to do. I think another big challenge is really the systems change. We can't have the systems change only be focused at the farm level. I think that that's where we're going to see the ecosystem benefits. And so I think that's often where the conversation does start and needs to start. But if brands aren't looking at the systems change for their purchasing practices, their knowledge of their supply chain, then we're going to miss the whole point, really, I think, of this incredible movement around regenerative and the focuses on soil health. So I do think that that still is a challenge. I think that, when we're thinking about data, I also think that we need to be very aware that it's an additional burden for farmers to really looking at that measuring and monitoring at the farm level. And so we need companies that want to support this for their ESG requirements, for their corporate sustainability requirements, to help also support that, not only to support the systems change, but if we want that data, we have to pay for it. We have to support it in one way or the other, because data can feel free, but to actually collect it, there's people on the ground doing that collection. And we've actually seen that be one of the major barriers to getting better information, is that this is yet another thing we're asking of farmers on the ground, and we don't want to ignore that. So I think that in all of that, what we're trying to look at is how we connect this into the standard systems that we have. We have a pilot that we've been launching for a little while now for our fiber crops module, which really will be looking at these soil measurements and what is it going to take? We really need more people to be involved in this. We are looking to work more with farmers and farm groups and brands and everybody, because, and when we work with Cotton Connect, I'm sorry, not Cotton Connect, Cotton Connect too, all the cotton guys, but looking beyond that and really wanting to think about how we connect these dots and what that looks like to be a good enough measurement to make this real. So I think those are a lot of the big ones. And I guess to answer your question more specifically, I think that there are still a lot of questions in the scientific community around the specifics of accounting for the exact amount of carbon being sequestered in any one system. We know that there's questions there. We know that there's going to be still a lot to work out when we start thinking about carbon crediting. Is that going to be the best way to drive this? We don't really know yet. We think it's good being tested. Still very early days, or we want to see the beneficial impact feels like the way to address these challenges that we're seeing.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Really, definitely, I think we're starting to also answer one of the key questions that's come up in the Q&A, but I'm going to let Laila go and then just summarize a bit on this. But I think we're all talking about some of these key and pointing specifically to key areas that all of us across this value chain are working on to remove those barriers to drive more adoption and more growth and more sustainable growing practices. Laila, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. I agree with a lot of the points made. I do think there is this pain point for farmers where it costs more to do some of these practices, not universally, but sometimes, and the rewards can be quite far off. And I also think we really do need to try and achieve the scale globally of transformation that we perhaps haven't got to yet. So I think, we've done pilots, we're now moving towards a sort of voluntary standard shift, so that now voluntary standards are including these. But actually, fundamentally, I think what we need to get to is expanding it so all governmental engagement with farmers incentivizes regenerative and kind of better practices in general globally. And that is a big ask. But I think ultimately voluntary standards will only get us part of the way. And what we need to do is embed it in everyday practices. But also really looking at the potential of the carbon markets, not to sort of just slap an offset on it and say, now we're going to monetize this, but to do it in a really thoughtful, careful way so that the system actually works for farmers and delivers the benefits to them at field level. And I think part of that is the sort of flip side is that we do need to demonstrate to the potential supporters, so governments, brands, the kind of off-takers of the benefit, it does work, because there are lots of questions raised. Is carbon sequestration even feasible in cotton production systems, and is it something that we can measure at scale? So I think demonstrating that, making sure that it is in line with emerging guidance like the land sector guidelines from the GHG protocol, making sure that the methodologies are airtight in terms of how we account for all of this, will be then something that we can use, so that if a company chooses to support the scaling of regenerative practices, they could make reduction claims against their own science-based targets, goals. They could report it in their kind of scope 3 emissions reductions for CDP. That's going to be really key, because if other entities can count that benefit, then it incentivizes them to invest in it. So I think that's going to really help us if we kind of crack that part of it, which is starting to happen now. And I think the final dimension of this is actually that it's not just about carbon, as Claire said, or GHG emissions. It's about this holistic system. So we need to find appropriate ways of measuring things like wider soil health and the kind of, even at the meta level, kind of biodiversity and water impact of regenerative systems. But it's not really going to be immediately obvious how to monetize those or how to match them with things like science-based targets for nature, which are emerging. So all of the kind of co-benefit space will really have to grow and develop quite fast in order to catch up with carbon. And it's so different. So I think those are going to be some of our opportunities and challenges.
Yeah, thanks, Laila. And I think just to pose the final slight, maybe mini lightning round across the panelists, just on this question of, we've talked about many of the benefits, right, of soil health management, measurement, the adoption of regenerative practices, no-till, cover crop, rotations, and been talking quite a bit about carbon in the last few minutes. If you were to just share, the kind of other benefits or set of benefits that is really kind of high up on the list from the standpoint of the various stakeholders that you represent or are working with, would love to have each of you just share that. We know there's quite a broad list across environmental, economic, and even kind of from a social and labor standpoint as well. But would just love to do quick lightning round. Laila, I might just ping back to you briefly.
Yeah, I think soil management is going to be huge. As climate bites, we're going to have to manage water very, very effectively, and soil health will be a part of that, definitely, and regenerative practices, certainly. And then the kind of link between soil health and biodiversity will also be really interesting to understand in more depth. But I think, both at the micro and macro level, I think regenerative as a kind of approach has massive potential to help us both with climate mitigation, but also with adaptation, which is going to be really acute need in the coming years.
Thank you. Claire?
Building on that, I think that biodiversity is one of the major benefits we're starting to see, certainly beneficial impacts. And I think from the corporate side, one of the things that we hear a lot is the opportunity to have a beneficial impact, I think is very exciting for brands. That idea of going beyond reducing the bad, I think that's been kind of the holy grail of sustainability for a long time. And I think that these practices provide that for the corporate. So looking beyond the water and biodiversity benefits on the ground, I think there is a corporate benefit, even if you're not able to quantify it exactly today, because we don't have the science. I think there's a great story to be told here.
Thank you. Deepika?
Yeah, agronomically, we can talk about a list of practices to reap the benefits of soil health, and Laila and Claire have beautifully mentioned that already. But I'd like to focus on two areas. The first area, again, to reiterate Claire's point, the importance of measurement, which comes with data collection. Accurate data collection, it sets the stage for appropriate environmental decisions, and with high quality data, information, especially on soil conservation, it not only will help to detect soil health trends, but also help portray the innovative growers that we heard this morning, adopting various technologies to measure better and predict their crops input or fertilizer needs. And the second area that I'd like to bring upon is to have a commonly accepted definition of regen agriculture and what metrics are more important to supply chain. And in order to achieve that effort, U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol has partnered with ICL, International Trade Center, Partnership for Sustainable Textiles by German government, Soil Health Institute, Field to Market, I can just go on, Textile Exchange, Cotton Incorporated, just to align with this industry-wide approach to regen agriculture.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Jesse?
Yeah, Deepika, just hearing you say that really points out that this is not a doing it alone thing. This is a do it together and go far kind of situation. So yeah, I think it's really interesting that cotton and agriculture has an opportunity not just to do less bad. I think it's fairly unique within the apparel space that not only can we reduce our impacts, but we can improve the earth and the land and create a betterment of the environment to some extent. So I think that's really interesting and promising that we can just do both of those things and have a really outsized positive impact towards improving the environment. But I think at the end of the day, for many growers and the cotton industry, these producers, these are families, they're farmers. They want to leave their farm to their children and their children's children. And if they don't keep the soil on that field, if they don't keep that as a working farm because soil is just washed down the river, they're not going to have that. So sustainability in the grower's lens is giving it to the children better than they found it. And I think that's what regenerative agriculture can really support. So I really look forward to helping the growers do just that. into the future with this team here and others.
Thank you, Jesse. That was a really sort of a beautiful way to end the discussion, and I think also echoed a lot of what we heard on the previous panel about the motivations for some of the companies, including Ralph Lauren, for stepping into investment and deeper partnership and more proactive work in this space because of the legacies that we hope to kind of continue to steward forward for our companies and for the impact that they've had and that they can continue to have in a more positive light going forward. And I just wanted to summarize a little bit and answer one of the questions that's getting upvoted in the Q&A, which is about those like barriers or blocks to scaling soil health, particularly in cotton production, and some of the things that we've heard from the panel. So I think this idea around de-risking, or this not idea, but this no need to de-risk the adoption of new practices or trying or experimenting to move more healthy soils and new regenerative approaches. So the idea of what are the mechanisms and how do we really bring the right resources, funding to that, which many of the folks here have been partnering to tap into USDA dollars and other resources to make that happen. Also just, note, I think on de-risking, a lot of the work that the U.S. Regenerative Cotton Fund is also in this space. So, the technical training and support and the budget analysis work that SHI and partners are doing to kind of also bring that information and education so that growers, again, location-based, can make decisions that have that lower risk and kind of a better known outcome just based on what their farmer members of their farmer networks, their mentors may also have experienced. On the metrics and measurement side, this investment and prioritization and focus on data collection, but also what are we measuring? How scalable or easy are those measurements and metrics? And again, just a plug for the work of SHI, I think there's really great, very concrete tools that are coming out of that around some of the key sort of indicators of soil health, all of which are being integrated and evaluated and adopted by many of you on this panel today. We're looking at that in the crop fiber module. We're looking at it in some of the other pilots, and of course, US ETP as well. And I think this definition, this alignment around the definition of regenerative, absolutely. I think again, everyone on the last panel, all towards that that agreed upon, kind of set definitions, measurements, and metrics are really building even on that data piece I just mentioned. And then finally, that the systems shift across all aspects of the system. So, we are asking and we're seeing changes, like real on the ground changes happening on field. What are the changes that are then happening across other parts of the value chain? How are corporates and buyers and our partners deeper into the supply chain starting to take different actions, commit directly to cotton quantities, these kind of direct to grower or more direct purchase models, all of which we are continuing to explore in different scales. But I think just noting that those are some of the key things that will really help to drive that adoption. It's not just about a grower making a decision. It's really that all those parts of the ecosystem or the puzzle that need to come together for us to see this go from that niche, to more normed. And I hope this conversation gave everyone insight into how many of other parts of the maybe sort of invisible aspects of the cotton value chain are partnering, working together, trying to really understand and work on the issues and remove those barriers to scaling. So I just want to thank you all for the time. Thank you again to SHI for having us, Jesse, Deepika, Claire, Laila. Round of applause virtually for all of you. And I will pass it back to Christine.